Hi everyone. Good to see you. Well, I don't see you because, but you can see me. It seems like a long time since we did see each other. Just to say hello from Bagheera and myself. We are looking forward to getting back together again soon. Just a welcome to Larry. Larry and I have spoken a few times on the phone, but we've never actually met, so I'm looking forward to that opportunity. Today, as far as the message is concerned, I was just thinking of life's in a bit of a turmoil. What are the things in life that are really worthwhile and that really last? What are the important things, I guess? I was looking at some photos the other day, and I saw a photo, well actually two photos, of a couple sitting on a scooter. And there's a photo of when 50 years ago they first started going together, and then there's a photo of 50 years later actually on the same scooter. It's a brilliant, lovely photo. And I was just thinking, that's obviously something that's worthwhile, a couple that have stayed together for over 50 years. Maybe we might be a bit surprised at the things that are worthwhile and that last in an era like ours. I was thinking of some examples in the Bible, and I came up with 5, the things that really last. What you put into people, what you invest into people. In Matthew's Gospel, there's the story sort of running in amongst all of the other stories and all the teaching of Jesus and Peter. Peter's call as he was out fishing. Jesus called out to him, pulled in the boat and started talking to the crowds. Peter going fishing with Jesus, just spending time with him, listening to him, spending time with him, seeing him do all sorts of wonderful things. At one stage, we all remember when he was walking on the water. Jesus came to them in the middle of the storm, walking on the water. And Peter said, "Can I come out and walk on the water too?" And of course, the story of where he starts walking, but then he loses his faith and he starts to fall, and he calls out to Jesus, "Help." And Jesus saves him. Later on again in the Gospel, Jesus asks the question of all of the disciples and says, "Who do you think I am? People say this and people say that, but who do you think I am?" And of course Peter says, "You're Christ, the Son of God." At that point, Jesus gives Simon, as he was, a new name, Peter. A little bit later, Jesus heads off to Jerusalem. It says he's going there. Of course, there's lots of danger in Jerusalem. Peter says, "No, Lord, don't go there." And then Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." And Peter is rebuked. The story of Jesus' trials and his crucifixion, and Peter's hanging about around the campfire, and he actually denies Jesus. And then the wonderful story of when after Jesus is resurrected, and they're walking on the beach together, Peter and Jesus together, and Jesus says to Peter, "Do you love me?" And Peter says, "Lord, you know that I love you." It's a story of Jesus investing himself into a person, into Peter. And that investment was something that was to last the rest of Peter's life. I recall I was at Dame Herring Centre, and Jimmy Simakopoulos was at the centre as a client. It was in Armidale in the Spastic Society, now Scope. And Jimmy had cerebral palsy. He was in a wheelchair. At one stage he had a wheelchair that was designed like a motor car, and he'd come roaring up. He'd pull up outside my office, and the office was too small for him to get his scooter in. And so he'd pile out, on all fours, crawl, open the door, walk in, come over to the chair, dragging his little briefcase behind him, climb up onto the chair, sit up, open his briefcase and start to talk with me. really developed a great relationship with Jimmy. He was the kind of guy that related to everybody. You could hardly understand what he was saying at times, but you caught every second word, and yet you ended up in agreement together. I met Jimmy about 5 or 6 years later. I was buying a car at the auctions, and I had to go down to the bank to get the money out, and happened to be in the newsagents, and I hear a voice, "G'day, Ray," and looked over there, and there was Jimmy in his wheelchair with a beautiful young lady pushing him, and went over to say hi to him. He said, "Look, I'd like you to meet my wife," and introduced me, and then he said, "This is the best centre manager I've ever had." It was a bit of nice toing and froing there. But Jimmy was just such a lovely guy, someone who was able to share with people. He eventually went into schools. He told me that he would go around and teach people about disability, and kids just loved him. They adored playing basketball out in the basketball court with him and so on. Just a lovely person. Investing your lives in people is what counts. The second thing I thought about was what you give to God counts. There's a story of a widow in the Gospels. Jesus was in the temple courtyard with his disciples, and interestingly, he was sitting there watching people put money into the offering, which is an unusual thing to do. I often wonder why he did that. Maybe it was to teach the disciples the lesson that is in the story. But the rich came and they put their money in. Some of them obviously people could see what they gave large amounts. And then this poor widow came in and she put her 2 cents, her 2 coins into the offering. And Jesus says, and it must have startled the disciples, Jesus says, "This widow gave more money than all the others put together." I wonder what happened to that amazing lady. Was she provided for? Did she go home? Was she hungry for her meal that Sabbath day? I suspect not. But the interesting thing, Jesus says, they all gave out of their wealth, but she gave out of her poverty. Put in everything, all she had to live on. What you give to God is what counts. What you give to God is what lasts in life. And whether that's our money or our lives, our involvement with people, that's what counts in life. What you give to God will last. When you give all that you have to Him, that's a gift for eternity that lasts forever. The third point was the stories you tell. You may remember some of the messages at the beginning of this year, during January, February. We took some questions from Genesis. How did the world begin? Why do you have thistles in the ground? How come sin came into the world? Why is there a rainbow in the sky? Why do we speak different languages? They're all questions that are raised as issues in the early chapters of Genesis. And it's interesting that they're all answered by stories. The story of the first creation, the story of Adam and Eve's creation, the story of the thistles is the story of sin, of Satan coming into the world and tempting them. So it's told in a story form. Why is there a rainbow in the sky? And you tell the story of Noah and the great flood. Why do we speak different languages? And of course the story of the Tower of Babel. The stories are there to be able to teach us about the things of God. And they're remembered because they are stories. These are stories that are out of the beginning of time. Brigitte and I went to the southern part of New South Wales, and there's a national park, the Mungo National Park, and we had an Aboriginal guide who took us and showed us these huge sand dunes out in the middle of the desert. You look around for the ocean, but there's no ocean, there's just huge sand dunes, and you wonder what's happened. And of course he explains that it was because it used to be a huge lake there, and a huge watercourse that would go through that lake. And it was something that happened many, many hundreds of years ago. And he says the stories came down in our culture of this area being flooded about 600 years ago. And the scientists at the time said no, they pooh-hooed it, that didn't happen. But further research has shown that in fact that did happen. And of course Mungo Man was found in that area, and Mungo Woman, which were the remains of Aboriginal people who lived at that time. What I'm trying to say is that stories told over time from one generation to the next generation is something that helps truth last, to keep going on over the centuries and over the years. Stories are remembered through time, and the stories that you tell will be remembered over time. Brigitte and I were on a cruise, just a day cruise, on the Gold Coast, and we were out on this cruise, and the guide was telling us about what was happening and all the different houses that were on the seashore. And he came to one house and he said that they built a house on that site there, and he said, but do you remember the saying, don't be like the foolish man who built his house upon the sand? And we said, yeah, of course we remember that. He just thought it was a proverb. In actual fact, he was quoting from Jesus. Jesus told that story. Everyone who hears these words of mine and doesn't do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain came down, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. That story has become a part of our culture. You see, stories are told on, and they become part of us. They're ingrained into us. And that's the point. We need to tell our stories, our personal stories of coming to know God, and of sharing that with our friends, with our families, those that are important. Stories of great people, stories that bring about a remembrance of truth. The fourth point, the things that last are the words that you speak. I used to work with Dad up on the block where we live now, and Dad would work away all day doing a particular job, and he'd get it down to the last little degree of everything just having to be just exactly right, and he'd stand back and look at me and say, a blind man and a galloping horse wouldn't notice any difference. He meant to say that